I was about 4 or 5 years old and my parents had just separated. My mom was living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I preferred to sleep in her bed whenever I stayed with her. Our 2 bedrooms were at the end of the hallway, directly across from each other. Our apartment was on the first floor, and I remember it was in the middle of summer, and my mother had a window open in her room, which was directly behind her bed, above the headboard. Anyways, I woke up in the middle of the night and remember sitting up and seeing that our cat was sitting in the doorframe of my mom's room. Her door was open and you can partially see into my bedroom. This was strange because our cat is typically in bed with us. As I was watching him, he walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to face my mother and wake her up, and the 3 or 4 seconds it took her to wake up and ask me what was wrong. We both looked up at the door frame, and there was a man standing by my open door, making his way out of my bedroom. I still don't know how she managed to do it so quickly, but my mother proceeded to pick me up and literally throw me out of the screen window. Again, we were on the first floor and it was maybe a 3-foot drop to the ground. She quickly followed and we were able to start screaming for help and someone called 911. The police came but didn't see any signs of forced entry. Only that our front door was unlocked, which led them to believe the man had exited that way. The strange thing was that my mom swore up and down that she had locked the door that night, with deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later, she was cleaning the kitchen and opened our water heater closet and found a notebook with some names and drawings, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The police were called again, but all they could do was speculate that the man had been in our house and hid until we were asleep. When I was young, I'd say 8 to 11ish, my sister, whom is 7 years older than me, would babysit when my parents were out. At the time, she smoked a lot and my parents made her smoke outside, of course. I'd follow her outside into the carport and play around and annoy her and such. One day, my sister notices a car at the end of the driveway just sitting in the road. It's a white SUV with a bike rack on top. It has the most tinted windows I have ever seen. You could not see inside of this car. It sat there until she went inside and then would drive at the end of the road and sit in the church parking lot and just wait. Wait until she came out for another smoke. And it would repeat this. Odd, but my sister is a brave lady and just ignored it. That is, until the next day, while my parents were out again and it showed up. It would sit at the end of the driveway and just watch. I don't know what they were doing, but they were watching my sister. If I didn't go out, I'd watch from the front window and it would just sit there and watch my sister. She told my father, who was a sheriff deputy at the time, and he called the cops and made a complaint. They showed up, looked around, but the SUV was nowhere to be seen. Months went by and nothing. Then one day, a good 9 months after we had all started, and 4th since the last sighting, it was back. It became a regular occurrence. Another day, my sister was outside doing her nasty habit, and sure enough, here it comes. This time we were alone as usual, and she decides she's had enough. She tells me to stay in the carport and she's going to confront them. She starts walking towards the SUV, and halfway down the driveway, she would later remark to us, "I felt utter terror, like I knew if I went any further I was dead. I was paralyzed by pure fear." She turned around and went inside. Finally, the family car was in the shop for some kind of issue, and we were all stuck home for the night. While my parents are home, my sister goes outside to smoke. I go outside with her, and eventually the SUV shows up. She tells me to run inside and tell my father, and I do. My dad promptly gets his gun and starts briskly walking down the driveway with it in hand, in the direction of the SUV, but not level towards it. The SUV floated down the road and peeled out onto the main road. My dad, being a cop, noted the year and model and distinguishing features. The scariest thing, the license plate had been covered in duct tape. We never saw it again, and my sister just kind of shrugs it off now. There's an abandoned house next to mine. The previous owner moved out to California 25 years prior and never sold it. I got a flashlight, gloves, and pushed a window open and went inside. Starting with the basement. In the basement was a grand piano. Still plays, but very much out of tune. Old World War II stuff. What seemed to be a signed Elvis poster. Some other really cool shit no one should ever leave behind. There's basically a whole story in the basement, including a broken wedding picture frame and instruments everywhere. On the main floor was an unmade bed, molded food still in the fridge and on stovetop, half-empty beers turned solid, lights that still hadn't been turned off. Then I started walking upstairs when I heard crying from one of the rooms. That's when I freaked the fuck out and haven't been there since. When I was growing up, one of my best friends told me about a very creepy situation that happened in the summer involving him, his younger brother, and a man in the window. When my friend and his little brother were younger, they shared a bedroom. They are some years apart, but his younger brother was born with various health issues including multiple sclerosis, and he is confined to a wheelchair and cannot take care of himself. So to keep an eye on him overnight, and his parents couldn't, they shared a bedroom. One night my friend woke up for no particular reason and happened to glance over at his younger brother, but noticed very startlingly a strange silhouette of a man wearing a top hat looking in through a window behind his younger brother's crib. The first thing my friend did was jump up and turn the lights on. Then he ran into his parents' room to tell them what he had saw. When his parents came back to the room to investigate, his younger brother was having a seizure in his crib. A few of his family members said it was his younger brother's guardian angel standing on the window that night. My friend believes it was death. I moved to my dad's when I was 10 and didn't know anyone in the area, except for the family my dad was friends with. A single mom with 3 kids. Luckily there was a girl a couple years older than me, 12 at the time I met her, and we got to know each other a little over a couple years. We weren't close, but ended up having the same friends. One night my friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be in the house alone because my friend's mom was at work, which is where this gets terrifying and sad. Her mother has been helping this one lady through work and got to know her very well. She found out her sister was in a mental institution and was let out recently. The night Rob is hanging out with my friend, they get a knock at the door. My friend thought it was their mom, as she knocks a certain way before coming in, and answered it without thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there and took off through the window to his house down the road. He never thought twice about it. It wasn't her mom. It was the sister of the lady her mom was helping, and she figured out through talking to her sister where her family was and her mom's work schedule. She came in, and this is where I don't know the details, and I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbors to call the police. The lady brutally murdered my friend a week from Christmas, decapitated her, and left her body naked in a bathtub. She even hid her head. They had to look through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral. My school's library is open until around 2 in the morning for the idiots like me, who don't do their essays until the last minute. It's a pretty small building, and most of the books are in the basement area called the Stacks. Just to give you a quick layout, there's the big main stairway that goes down to the Stacks, a vending machine room, and the long hallway with 4 entrances into the Stacks. The Stacks are 2 really big rooms on opposite sides of the hallway, with a huge amount of bookshelves and study desks lining the walls. I was there around 11 p.m. last year. It was a pretty research-intensive essay, so I was down there in the Stacks working in one of the study desks, so I didn't have to keep going up and down the stairs again. I had been there for maybe 2 hours, and everyone except for a boy working a few desks down from me had already left. I was pretty zoned out by this point. It was an 8 a.m. class, so I didn't really have much time until it was due, and I was sort of panicking. So it really pissed me off when I heard someone flipping through book pages really fast to make them do that really loud whir noise at the other end of the room. I sort of ignored it for a while, thinking they'd go away eventually, but they kept doing it. After about 5 minutes, I got sick of it and started walking over to them to tell them to knock it off. I get about 3 steps across the room and it just stopped. I sat back down and it was quiet again for like 10 more minutes before the flipping book pages started again, only louder, like they grabbed a huge book that time. The boy started getting pissed off too, and he stood up and started walking through the bookshelves trying to find them. It keeps going, so I get up too and start looking around with him. It got really loud and it was obvious where it was coming from by that point, so we started walking towards it. He was on one side of the shelves and I was on the other. We walked all the way down the shelves, no one was there. We hadn't seen anyone come in the stacks, and we were on the side of the room with the entrances. No way anyone could come in without us seeing them. The noise stopped again, and we both just sort of slowly walked back to our seats. I assumed it was just a fan or something in the other room, and I really needed to get my essay done. We sat down and immediately the noise started again. It sounded like it was coming from next to the guy's chair. He shoved his stuff in his bag, looked at me, said fuck this, and took off. I was out maybe 5 seconds behind him. I still don't go back down to the stacks at night, even when there's other people down there. No essay's worth getting murdered by a weird book ghost. When my grandfather was younger, he became the principal of an elementary school. He was in his late 20s, early 30s at the time, and despite being young, he was a born leader. He was a great principal and everybody loved him. I can attest to that as I attended multiple award ceremonies for him, and the respect and admiration he had was crazy. There was a young boy at the school who was having behavioral issues in class, and my grandfather saw that the kid didn't have a lot of parental support. So he called his father and had a talk with him about spending more time with his son and just a general parenting session. It turned out that all the boy needed was his dad's attention, and after a few weeks, he was a happy model student. Whenever my grandfather would leave school late, he would see the dad was playing basketball with his son after he had got home from work. It was one of those moments that he took pride in, being able to make a difference in other people's lives. However, not everything has such an easy solution, and my grandfather found himself having to deal with an employee, Stanley the janitor, who was showing up to work drunk. Stanley was an alcoholic with a mean streak, and my grandfather tried on multiple occasions to deal with his behavior. Finally, one day, Stanley showed up so drunk that my grandfather sent him home, and he called the superintendent to let him know that he was going to fire him the next morning after he had sobered up. He then warned them to let him deal with it when Stanley was sober, because he was not a stable person. As it goes in these kind of stories, the superintendent was furious and decided that he was going to call Stanley up himself and fire him despite my grandfather's warning. No one called my grandfather to tell him about it either, so he was completely in the dark and thought he could just deal with it in the morning. Stanley was furious and went to the school that evening. He searched the offices, my grandfather's included, and tore things apart until he finally found what he wanted. He was in a blaze of fury, and on his way out, he saw the father and his son playing basketball. He walked towards them and pulled something out of his trousers. It was a gun. He then proceeded to shoot the little boy, killing him instantly. The father was so upset, was hysterical, crying about it, but somehow managed to get the gun away from Stanley and shoot him. My grandfather was called to the elementary school immediately by the police because there were 2 dead bodies. The little boy and Stanley were dead, but even worse was the crying from the father, him saying that he couldn't save his son. It was clear that he would never forgive himself for that day. My grandfather was pulled aside by one of the police, who had searched Stanley for evidence. They had found a hit list of the people he was going to kill, and all the addresses of those people that he had received when searching the offices. My grandfather was number 1 on that list. So if it wasn't for that father, it's likely that I would have never been able to meet my grandfather, and possibly my mother and grandmother would have been killed if Stanley had been able to complete his mission.
To this day, I get goosebumps whenever I hear that story, and it's just so chilling. My grandfather never uttered a single word about this after his initial re-encounter, and my mother made me swear to never tell him I knew. He carried the weight of that boy's death until he died. So Stanley, I'm glad we never had to meet, and you were stopped before you could cause more harm.
I was an 18-year-old high school senior and was about 3/4 of the way through the year. I had moved that year and switched to a school about 30 minutes away from where I used to go. I stayed in touch with a few people from my old school and got invited to go camping with a few of them over Memorial Weekend, which basically meant getting drunk as fuck in the forest. I invited 2 girls and 1 guy from my new school to come hang out for a night, and met them in the closest town from the campsite about 40 minutes away. The guy Jeremy hopped in my car, and the girls followed me up, and we got to the campsite without incident. The campsite was 30 minutes away from any human signs of life, outside of a shitty dirt road. The night started off fine with everybody getting completely trashed, and me beating one of the girls I brought along named Sarah at beer pong, and she was very drunk and all over me. I guess the 18-year-old version of me, that night couldn't have been going better at that point. At about 12:30, things started to die down as half of us had already puked and were heading in for the night, and I was much too drunk to even try to fuck Sarah. A lot of the night is still a blur, but I remember climbing into a tent, and there were 5 of us in it, 3 guys and 2 girls. At around 2:30 a.m., I was awoken by the sound of a gunshot. I was very drunk and had a hard time processing anything, but in my drunken state, I figured it was one of the people I was camping with being a dick. One of the guys, Brent, had stayed sober the entire night and had brought a shotgun up with him, so I figured it was him being a dick to everyone who was drunk. I checked my phone and went back to sleep. I fell asleep, and what I think is about 3 a.m., I'm awakened by someone bawling their eyes out, and I am still having a very hard time processing anything. After about 5 minutes, I realize it's Brent, and I stumble out of my tent followed by Jeremy, and I walk out and see Brent is bleeding profusely from his nose and mouth, and I run over to him, stumbling the entire time. I am then hit in the head with a rock and knocked unconscious. Everything from this point forward is Jeremy's point of view. Jeremy to this day is my best friend and has told me his version of the story many times. He says I passed by a tree and a large man lunges out and smashes my face with a rock. After hitting me, he lunges at Jeremy and tackles him straight on his ass. Jeremy at the time was 5'8", 140 pounds, and he describes the man as at least 6'4" and 280. Jeremy is being choked to death by this wooden monster of a man, and he hears another gunshot from a pistol. Sarah had managed to find a pistol Brent had also brought along with him, and fired a shot, missing the man by a large amount, but it managed to startle him and he sprinted off into the woods. They just let him go, and Jeremy drove me and Brent to the hospital. I had 3 broken teeth and a severe concussion, and Brent had part of his tongue mutilated with a knife and a broken nose. Brent has never talked to me or any of my friends from the trip about what exactly happened when he was outside alone with the man, and refused to give the police much of a description. The man was never caught, and I have never been in the deep forest again.